Hello, welcome to Diagonal Move. This is an unboxing stroke component overview video for Pacific Tide, the United States versus Japan 1941-45, second edition of that particular game. It's designed by Gregory M Smith, published by Compass Games. The cover, as you can see, is the aircraft carrier battles in the Pacific during World War II, just in case the title didn't make that very clear. Box itself is pretty thin, one of the smaller boxes, but it seems pretty solid and chunky as these things go. The back of the box gives you the usual kind of detail, a bit of an overview of the map there and the cards and the components inside. And it says that this is a compact strategic level game covering the struggle between the US and some Commonwealth forces against Japan in the Second World War. It's utilising a fast-paced, unique card-driven system stroke combat build system revolving around carrier operations, which will provide players with a multitude of decisions. So it says there are operational and tactical nuances as players decide when and how to commit their carrier forces, land-based air and even intelligence assets. To a degree, the Japanese player is racing against the clock. The quality of pilots degrades over time starting in 43, as he also loses the strategic initiative to undertake initial actions. US player fights against the clock also and cannot take a relaxed approach in defeating Japan. If the US doesn't win by 1945, doesn't win at all, tension builds as both sides race toward decisive carrier battles and the seizure of key geographical objectives. Complexity is 3 out of 10. The timescale is a single year with alternating multiple card play. Hopefully that is not real time. The map scale is an area-based map. Carriers, carrier groups, fleets, army level infantry and air groups, so that is the unit scale. 1 to 2 players, best with 2, but it does feature a solitaire bot system and typically would take 2 to 4 hours to play. Some more information there about the different types of cards and so on. The artwork is by Ilya Kudryashov, who is a well-known wargame designer, designs many of the Hollenspiel games and has also designed a game or two of his own. Okay, so let's look at what's inside this box of Pacific Tide. There is a bag full of bags, which always comes in handy. A bag full of dice, faction-specific colours, always nice to see, I think, there. Then we have some cards. This is actually one deck of cards that I've separated into 3. I'll have a closer look at those in a moment. But basically there's one dictating each year, and then there is a deck each for the US and the Japanese player. There's a rulebook, and again I'll come to that more in a moment. And then we have 2 player aids. They are identical. On one side is the sequence of play, the other side is the solo system. And then there is some counters, just the one counter sheet, and a map, a mounted map. Okay, so I'll clear some of this away, start taking a look at the components. So let's take a look at the cards first. There's these cards here which dictate things like the turn order and certain other factors as you go through each individual round. 1941, 42, 3, 4, 5, and then a special Pearl Harbor attack sequence on the back of the 1945 card. As you can see, as you go through, it reflects that initiative change from Japan to the Americans. Starting in 1941, the Japan player is the first player, and by the time you get to 44, certainly, probably in 43, yeah, 43, the US have taken that initiative. And the information on here says, for example, US units, 2 dice per unit for the naval, land-based air units, 1 die per unit. Similar info for the Japanese. So that's what dictates the flow of the round and the advantages each side may or may not have as the war progresses. The bulk of the game derives around these cards as far as I understand it, and it's very similar setup to many other games from what I can see without having had a detailed read of the rules. You basically have a name of a card, a number of different effects you can play it for, and then the year it applies to, a cost, and this little A here relates to the solo system as I understand it currently. And there are some that you presumably can play in the first year, then in 1942, 43, and so on. Some years have greater cards than others. So, for example, there's not that many in 1941, but by the time 1942, 43, the card volumes on each side gets somewhat more until you start going towards the end of the war. The cards themselves are not the thickest I've ever seen, but they're pretty decent. Nice feel to them. Have a sort of an image from the time on each of those cards there. There's no real flavour text as such. I know sometimes in games like this you do have a bit of flavour text, but there's no real flavour text on these cards. And these ones, as you can probably tell, are the Japanese side. The American player will have a similar set of cards with more or less the same layout. And you have a different number for each year, as with the original deck I was just showing for the Japan side. Okay. Moving on to the player aids, and hopefully the light's not too reflective there. We have quite a heavily detailed sequence of play. Well, the sequence of play is actually just the first part there with like a few bullet points almost as to what happens in each turn, but then you have summaries of key points, attack limitation reminders, retreat after combat, retreat before navy combat, amphibious assault. And at the top here is an attack matrix. So that's quite interesting. Doesn't look massively detailed in terms of its combat. However, there does seem to be a fair number of steps and things to be aware of as you play through. So this is for the general game, but then on the back we do have this solitaire aid as to what the other side will do if you're playing this solo. As with many of these card-driven games, it's quite difficult to play solo, or it can be difficult to play solo. But this is one of a number of games in recent years that's come out with a dedicated solo system or a solo guide system, if you like. And on here we'd have like a strategic plan, priority, which is where those letters on the cards come in, purchase priority, then sort of annual priorities based on what year you're in, and then certain triggers for certain cards, and then a handicap depending on how difficult or easy you find playing against the bot. Okay, so there's a couple of pretty dense player aids there, I have to say. They do look quite dense. And speaking of dense, let's take a quick look at the rulebook. I did have a look at the rulebook before filming, and it's pretty dense. It's very thin. On the positive side, it's very thin. There's really not many pages of rules. However, as you'll see in a moment, the typeface of the rules is very much like a textbook rather than something you might see in more recent games or in many other games these days. But for the first part of the rulebook, we have some nice images of the counters and the different cards and what each individual thing does in the card, together with the setup information, which is based on this table here. And then you flip over and there are some more setup information. There's a midway scenario for setup and then a kind of a campaign setup as well. The rest of the text, the rest of the rulebook is very dense to context, with barely a bullet point to be seen, which always intrigues me when I come across games like this, especially as this one, according to the box anyway, was a 2022 reprint or a reissue. I just wonder if they could have perhaps refreshed some of the design here as well. But there is some examples, which is always good, and you get sort of a good example there of how you put the forces on the map during an attack, with air units. And as you go through, there's some other examples as well. Amphibious landing, that particular one. And you have AA fire, year-end supply, repairs, guerrillas. Interesting. And then by the time you hit page 12, you have actually hit the designer notes. and information about the solitaire player. There's really only about 9-10 pages in total, and some of them do have those bigger examples. Hopefully it's not as dense as my first impression is showing, but we will find out as we play, I guess, or as we try and learn the rules. So anyway, that's the rule book. Make of that what you will. Not my favourite layout, but other people may like that, I don't know. Onto the counters, the bit that many people do enjoy looking at. We have here fairly small counters, sort of standard size, I suppose I want to call them. I suppose I've been spoilt recently with some games with some bigger counters. But we have sort of some armies, air forces of various types, British, American, the Japanese Air Force. We also have the Navy, a few different counter types. There's sort of like regular fleets, I guess, and then the carriers over this side, and the infantry units for the Japanese player there, and then these opportunity control markers and sort of status kind of symbols there, including 3 for the solo bot, it looks like, which is A, B and D. There's just the one sheet of counters. It's pretty good quality. I mean, if I punch it out, probably find a few of those little things on the edges that people tend to like to cut off, you know, the little nubs as they call them. But on the whole, it's a pretty decent counter. I may even have to go and find a way of getting rid of those myself, actually, looking at that. But on the whole, it's a pretty decent sort of counter sheet there. The reverse is double-sided, and it has a few different other sort of status symbols and various other things on there as well. Okay, quite a nice counter sheet, reasonably thick in terms of its size of the counters. Should be pretty straightforward to move on that map. My favourite part of every unboxing video I've ever made and ever seen is the look at the map. And this is a lovely map. It's pretty small. It's not super big at all, which is fine. It is mounted, but it's quite a reasonably sort of thin-ish, I guess, mounted map, but that's absolutely fine. But it's nice to have a mounted map. I do appreciate that. So it's lovely and clear to see. You can clearly see where different elements are in control at the beginning, and you can, it's point to point clearly. Got the edge of the Americas over that side, and then the Chinese mainland all down here. There's a section there for the solitaire personality marker, current Japanese build points up the top there. Some reminders of what's what just here, different control markers and so on, fleet repair areas and so on. A key, it's a map key, there you go, I thought I'd remember what it's called. And then a holder for the current year, which is where these cards would live, one assumes, as you play through. So it's a nice map. I do like the map, nice, sort of clean, easy to see map is my first impression of that. Okay, that then is my very quick look at the components of Pacific Tide, a card-driven game from Compass Games with the solo option, which is the main reason really why I picked it up. I hope that's been helpful. Hope it has given you an idea of what's inside the game, and I will see you next time.